I'm not talking about the best movie of the decade. I'm talking about the movie of the decade. There's a few contenders for the 1920s movie of the decade. You have Metropolis, which had groundbreaking set design, production, effects, and was revolutionary for the sci-fi genre. You have Nosferatu, a movie that stayed relevant for over a century, inspired countless remakes, and is still pretty much universally recognizable to this day. But for the movie of the decade, I decided to go with The Passion of Joan of Arc. The main reason is because this movie was instrumental in defining the language of cinema as we know it, mainly through its use of close-up shots. Not that this was the very first movie to ever use close-up shots, but this really demonstrated how powerful and effective they can be. This movie showed that a close-up shot and a great acting performance can make the audience experience deep emotional resonance. It blew people's minds at the time. And it's also a pretty interesting depiction of a historical figure, because it's not just recapping historical events the way that a lot of biopics do. This movie is pretty much purely focused on the emotional experience of Joan of Arc. Alright, and I'll be honest, I definitely do struggle a little bit to get into silent films. I did kind of have to force myself to watch this. I'm not going to pretend like I'm some connoisseur of silent films. If I were to get abducted by aliens right now and they forced me to pick one silent film to represent the silent era of cinema, I would give them The Passion of Joan of Arc. The 1930s, I think this is one of the easier decades to pick the movie of the decade. Because yeah, you do have a lot of iconic movies like Mr. Smith Goes to Washington, Gone with the Wind, Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, M. But I think the clear choice is The Wizard of Oz. When I think of movie magic, this is one of the first movies I think of. Granted, in order to create that movie magic, they had to do a lot of fucked up stuff in production. Like, they were straight up dumping asbestos all over these actors. They were making the actors wear toxic costumes and makeup. If you go down that rabbit hole, there was all sorts of horrible working conditions in order to make this movie, to the point where it almost makes it kind of creepy once you watch this movie knowing how they made it. But you know what? You can't deny that the final product is absolutely insane. The Technicolor still looks great to this day. When they make that switch from the depressing sepia tone in Kansas to the beautiful Technicolor land of Oz, it's just so iconic. That is the definition of cinema. Another thing that's pretty crazy about this movie when you really think about it is how mainstream popular it is. Let's be honest, most people are not going to watch very many movies that came out all the way back in the 1930s, but pretty much everyone and their mother has seen The Wizard of Oz. It truly does have mainstream appeal. I'm not just talking about with movie nerds and cinephiles. No, I'm talking about everyone. Pretty much everyone has seen The Wizard of Oz. I can't think of any other movie that has had that much of long-term staying power that came out that long ago. So just for the longevity and the cultural impact of The Wizard of Oz, I think this is a pretty easy choice for movie of the decade. So you know how I was just saying the 1930s was an easy decade to pick? With the 1940s, we may as well just wrap this up really quickly because we all know what it is. I'll give some quick honorable mentions to Casablanca, Bicycle Thieves, The Maltese Falcon, Fantasia, The Great Dictator. But yeah, the movie of the decade is Citizen Kane. It's the obligatory choice. Pretty much all the cinematography, lighting, and editing techniques that were used by Orson Welles to make this movie, that is pretty much just the standard for making movies now. And it's not even that he invented all these techniques, it's more so that he put it all together into one movie, and then people watched it and they were like, oh, okay, yeah, that's how it's done. I'm not going to sit here and pretend that Citizen Kane is my all-time favorite movie or anything like that. I saw it one time and that was probably enough. I don't really have any desire to rewatch it. I'm satisfied with my one Citizen Kane viewing experience. But I feel like you kind of have to pick Citizen Kane as the movie of the decade just for how influential it was. This is pretty much the movie of the entire history of cinema. The 1950s is absolutely stacked with contenders. 12 Angry Men, Tokyo Story, The 400 Blows, Rear Window. But I ended up deciding between Hitchcock's Vertigo and Kurosawa's Seven Samurai. A lot of people consider Vertigo as one of the greatest movies ever made, because not only is it a banger thriller that still holds up to this day, but it is also extremely innovative and influential. This movie invented the dolly zoom. I mean, it's literally called the Vertigo effect. If you don't know what that is, it's where you move the camera either forwards or backwards, and at the same time you zoom the camera. If you're going forwards, you zoom out, and if you go backwards, you zoom in, and it creates this super crazy effect. And you see this being used all the time in movies. One of the most famous ones is from Jaws, and you have Hitchcock to thank for that. But for movie of the decade, I decided to go with Seven Samurai. Kurosawa set the standard for massive action adventure movies. To this day, this is still one of the most epic movies you will ever find, and not even just because of the cinematography and the set pieces and all that. It also has top tier storytelling and characters. It's just a timeless movie. If you're having a movie night, I really do think everyone will have a good time watching this. You, your movie nerd buddy, Steven Spielberg, your grandma, your dog, everyone is gonna have a great time watching Seven Samurai. And another thing that was actually really influential about this movie is the general story structure, assembling a team together to take on the big bad. I don't think Seven Samurai was the first movie to ever do that. I'm pretty sure it wasn't, but it did it so effectively that so many other movies have tried to emulate it since then. The Magnificent Seven, The Avengers, even that movie A Bug's Life. That's basically just Seven Samurai, but with insects. So yeah, the 1950s was tough, but Seven Samurai takes it. There's plenty of iconic movies to choose from the 1960s. You have Lawrence of Arabia, Psycho, The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, Persona. But for the movie of the decade, I think we all know it's 2001: A Space Odyssey. This is just that movie. Even the greatest directors working today, the most genius, technically skilled directors, they watch 2001: A Space Odyssey and they go, how the hell did he do that? It came out in 1968, and still to this day, I don't think there's any space movie that looks even close to as good as this. The only aspect of this movie that has shown its age a little bit is the apes at the beginning of the movie. I mean, they still look good. When you're watching it, you can tell that those are dudes wearing ape costumes. But outside of that, everything else in this movie looks perfect. All your favorite space movies, whether it's Star Wars or Interstellar or Star Trek, you name it, all of them owe a lot to Stanley Kubrick. It truly is one of those rare movies to come out where you don't even know how that was possible. And I'm not even just talking about 1968 standards. I mean, even today, you watch this movie today and you're like, how is that possible? Even if it dropped in 2026, you would be thinking that this is insane. The 1970s was probably the single most difficult decade to decide because you have movies like Jaws, which is widely considered as the first summer blockbuster. You have Taxi Driver, which is the poster child of New Hollywood and one of the best movies to come out of that era. You have all-time classics like Apocalypse Now, which is still considered to be one of the best war movies of all time. But for me, this ended up coming down between Star Wars and The Godfather. And obviously Star Wars is one of the biggest cultural phenomenons in the history of cinema. This thing changed the filmmaking industry forever. Even if Jaws was the first summer blockbuster, I think Star Wars is actually the main blueprint that defined what blockbuster movies would be going forward. The influence is undeniable. With that being said, I do love Star Wars, but the movie of the decade has to go to The Godfather. I don't think we're ever gonna get another movie that is as universally beloved and acclaimed as The Godfather. It's number 2 on the IMDb Top 250. It's number 15 on the Letterboxd Top 250, so that means that casual audiences love it. It's number 12 on the Sight and Sound Critics Poll, so critics love it. And it's number 3 on the Sight and Sound Directors Poll, so directors love it as well. Think about how insane that is. The entire spectrum of movie enjoyers, from the most casual audiences to people who are the greatest directors of all time, pretty much everyone agrees that The Godfather is one of the greatest movies ever made. I'm not trying to determine the movie of the decade based on internet polls, but it does demonstrate how much of a crazy consensus there is around this movie. There is only one reputable film historian I have ever seen that dislikes this movie.
It insists upon itself.
What does that even mean?
Okay, but outside of Peter Griffin, The Godfather is the gold standard of the crime genre. I mean, there's not much I can really say about The Godfather. You already know how good The Godfather is. When I think of the 1980s, I think of iconic blockbuster movies. I'm talking about Raiders of the Lost Ark, The Terminator, Back to the Future, Aliens, E.T. All of those are quintessential 80s movies. But for movie of the decade, I'm going with Empire Strikes Back. You might think that this is a blasphemous take to pick Empire Strikes Back as the movie of the decade, right after I just snubbed the original Star Wars movie. I will admit that I am kind of compensating a little bit. I feel like there has to be some Star Wars representation here, but I actually do think there is a legitimate argument that The Empire Strikes Back is the most iconic Star Wars movie, even ahead of the original. Obviously, the original Star Wars is the biggest cultural phenomenon, the most influential Star Wars movie, but if you actually think about it, The Empire Strikes Back has most of the legendary famous scenes that people remember from Star Wars. The Imperial March, probably the most recognizable song in the history of cinema. That actually came from The Empire Strikes Back. It wasn't in the original. The classic Darth Vader paternity reveal, probably the most famous scene in all of Star Wars, one of the most quoted lines in all of cinema. Empire Strikes Back. Yoda, everybody's favorite Jedi Master. Empire Strikes Back. Boba Fett, one of the coolest costumes and character designs ever seen on a big screen. Empire Strikes Back. Plus, on top of that, Empire Strikes Back is pretty much universally agreed on by Star Wars fans as being the best Star Wars movie, and I happen to agree with that. It has everything that made the first Star Wars movie great, but just upgraded in every way. Better writing, better VFX, better acting performances, better cinematography, better music. I really think The Empire Strikes Back is the pinnacle of Star Wars, and I think it is a fitting choice for the movie of the 80s. The 1990s is definitely one of my favorite decades of cinema. There's a lot of good options to choose from here. Goodfellas, The Matrix, Jurassic Park, Fight Club, Toy Story, Silence of the Lambs, Shawshank Redemption, all great options, but I think the movie of the decade has to be Pulp Fiction. And remember, I'm not talking about the best movie of the decade, I'm talking about the movie of the decade, because let's be honest, there are millions of people who became movie enthusiasts after they watched Pulp Fiction when they were 14 years old. And okay, you can make fun of Pulp Fiction all you want for that. You have to admit that it is pretty impressive for a movie to have that kind of effect on people. It completely changed the game and reinvented the crime genre to the point where you have a whole slew of movies that have basically tried to be just like Pulp Fiction. They tried to emulate the dialogue style. They tried to emulate Tarantino's take on the crime genre. Now, granted, a lot of those movies aren't the best. Tarantino still does it better than anyone else, but you can't deny it is a very influential movie. Plus, on top of all that, it's got to be one of the most quoted movies ever. Let's be honest, I bet half of you watching this have at least 5 different Pulp Fiction quotes that you could pull out of your arsenal right now. You already have them ready to go in your repertoire. It really is just a fantastic movie, and I feel pretty confident to say that this is the movie of the 90s. There's actually quite a few modern classics from the 2000s. There Will Be Blood, No Country for Old Men, Mulholland Drive, City of God, and Inglourious Basterds. I'd even throw Mean Girls in there. But for the movie of the decade, this came down between The Lord of the Rings, The Dark Knight, and Spirited Away. But anyone who knows anything about me knows I'm picking Lord of the Rings for the movie of the decade. And I kind of view the Lord of the Rings trilogy as being one big movie, but if I have to pick one out of the 3 to be the movie of the decade, I'd probably have to go with Return of the King. Fellowship is my favorite one, but if I'm being realistic, movie of the decade, Return of the King's probably the best pick. The trilogy won a total of 17 Academy Awards. Return of the King alone won 11. That's actually kind of crazy when you think about this movie with hobbits and elves fucking shield surfing and dwarf tossing. That's the most winning movie in the history of the Oscars. But setting all that aside, the real reason why I think Lord of the Rings is the movie of the decade is because it's essentially creating this modern mythology that I would put on par with Homer's The Odyssey. And obviously most of the credit for that goes to J.R.R. Tolkien. It's actually the books that created that modern mythology. But you have to give a lot of credit to the movies as well, because I think they just further solidified the legacy of Lord of the Rings. You could not have asked for a better adaptation than this. They completely nailed almost every single aspect to the point where it almost feels like a miracle. I mean, yeah, these are just universally beloved movies that further solidified Lord of the Rings as the definitive modern myth. I think you kind of have to pick these as the movie of the decade. For the 2010s, since it's still so recent, it's not nearly as clear-cut as past decades. Mad Max Fury Road, Get Out, Inception, Into the Spider-Verse, Moonlight. I think these are all really good contenders, but I think the 2 biggest contenders are Parasite and Avengers Endgame. Now, first of all, regardless of what you think about the MCU, you cannot deny that the Marvel Cinematic Universe is pretty much the defining entity of 2010 cinema. And you also can't deny the concept of a cinematic universe. That's extremely innovative and influential. I know that it's not the first movies to implement a cinematic universe. You can trace that all the way back to the 1930s with the Universal horror movies, but the Marvel Cinematic Universe took that concept to a whole nother level and created these massive event films that have never really been seen before. I just don't think you can ignore the MCU if we're going to be talking about the movie of the decade. And Avengers Endgame is the absolute pinnacle of the MCU, not in terms of being the best movie, but it is the biggest event film and the biggest cultural phenomenon of the 2010s, easily. But you know what? I'm still going with Parasite. Obviously, it has nowhere near the cultural impact of the MCU, but this is a movie with an $11 million budget. It doesn't have any intellectual property to fall back on, so I don't think it's really a fair comparison to say that Avengers Endgame's cultural impact is greater than Parasite, like obviously. Parasite still did have a massive impact. It made $250 million at the box office, and it became the first international movie to win Best Picture. I'm not basing this off of box office or awards, but I'm just using that to demonstrate how influential and impactful this movie was. And here's the thing with Parasite, as much as it has amazing cinematography and it's full of symbolism and it's using all these different filmmaking techniques to tell a layered story, it is also a total crowd pleaser. Even my dad, who's not really that much of a movie person, he told me that Parasite is his favorite movie of all time. He said it's the best movie he's ever seen. And I think another big X factor that Parasite has going for it is that it does such a great job of capturing the essence of the time period. The movie is very much about income inequality and social class, and I mean, yeah, there are a lot of movies about that, but I think Parasite handles it in such an interesting way. It is very insightful, but it never feels preachy about it, and it never forgets to be an entertaining movie. I just think it very much captures the zeitgeist and the aesthetic of the 2010s, but also in a way that feels timeless. And it takes place in South Korea, but it also feels so universal. It doesn't really matter where you're from. I think anyone can relate to this movie. So I don't know, maybe I'm crazy for picking this over Avengers Endgame, but I just think Parasite has enough X factors going for it, and it's such a masterpiece. I think it's a pretty fitting choice for the movie of the 2010s. Okay, so I'm making this video in 2025. Obviously, it's way too soon to be declaring anything as the movie of the decade. So what I'm going to do instead is I'm going to go through some of the top contenders and then give my take on how strong their odds are. Oppenheimer, we got a biopic about a scientist being this much of a massive hit with general audiences. That's pretty crazy. And at the same time, the critics loved it, and obviously the film industry loved it since this swept the Oscars. It also has the relevance factor going for it, since nuclear weapons are always going to be one of the biggest threats to humanity. Is this my favorite movie of the decade? Definitely not. But I'd say it absolutely is a very strong contender. Barbie. Now, even if you don't like this movie, you think it's a glorified toy commercial, I think we can all agree that this is probably the biggest cultural phenomenon when it comes to general audiences. One thing I will say about Barbie though, some aspects of this movie are probably not going to age that well. For example, the movie had a reference to Zack Snyder's cut of the Justice League. Nobody in the future is going to understand that reference. I don't think the movie has too many things like that, but there are enough little things like that sprinkled here and there. Probably not going to age that well. But you know what? The movie resonated with so many people, and I personally don't think that the movie is a masterpiece or anything like that, but I really enjoy Barbie. I've watched this movie multiple times. It's always enjoyable every single time. It's such a great comfort movie. I'd say Barbie is actually a pretty decent contender. The Minecraft movie. No, I'm just kidding. Sinners. I've seen a vocal minority of people saying that this movie is a little overrated. People saying that it follows a lot of the standard tropes in the vampire genre, that it has a messy third act, that is derivative of From Dusk Till Dawn. And I do think that those are somewhat valid criticisms, but I would say the real appeal of Sinners is how it uses music as a storytelling device, especially when it comes to conveying its themes on assimilation and cultural appropriation. The music itself is amazing. You could just pop on the Sinners soundtrack and have a great time just listening to the music alone. But it's so cool the way that the movie conveys music history in such a cinematic way. I genuinely think it's one of the best musicals I've ever seen. Oh yeah, and it just happens to be a really entertaining vampire genre movie on top of that. I really don't think it's overrated. I think Ryan Coogler delivered an instant classic, and I would say it's a very strong contender for movie of the decade. Dune Part 2, and I view this as a very similar situation as Lord of the Rings, in that this is just a fantastic adaptation of an already all-time classic book. In the same way that the Lord of the Rings movies kind of further solidified the legacy of Tolkien's books, I think the Dune movies are kind of doing the same thing with Frank Herbert. And obviously the Dune movies have nowhere near the same level of cultural impact as the Lord of the Rings movies had, but I still think the Dune movies are very respectable in that sense. And I will admit that I am a bit biased because I am a Dune super fan, but I really do think that these Dune movies are the definitive adaptation of the books. And the books have already proven to stand the test of time for decades, so I don't really see any reason why the movies wouldn't as well. I do think a lot of this will depend on how Dune Part 3 turns out, but as of right now, I would say Dune Part 2 is a very strong contender for movie of the decade. And there's a bunch of other contenders worth mentioning. You have Top Gun Maverick, Everything Everywhere All at Once, One Battle After Another, Superman, The Batman. I would say that about covers most of the big contenders, but let me know if I'm missing anything or if what you think might have the best chance of becoming the movie of the 2020s. And also keep in mind, the movie of the decade is not an exact science. You probably disagree with a lot of my choices. That's okay. This is just my take on the movie of the decade, but I would love to hear your takes as well. So let me know in the comments if you disagree with some of my picks. Anyway, that's it.